There's a big shakeup coming to the Pelicans front office. I'll tell you why losing general manager Bryson Graham is a big deal, but why the Pelicans will be okay going forward. It's the Tuesday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with you on this Tuesday. And we've got some big news that broke in the middle of the day on Monday, and that is a big shakeup to the Pelicans front office here. And that is them losing Bryson Graham to the Atlanta Hawks. He is making that move from New Orleans to Atlanta. We'll break down what it means for the Pelicans in the short term and long term. Look at Bryson Graham's role and why he was important to this team and how they just move forward from here. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. We got a lot to talk about this week, about basically just 2 weeks to the NBA draft. I'm looking forward to it, a whole 2-day event now. So let's get into this. Shams Charania of ESPN broke the big news, and that is Bryson Graham is joining the Atlanta Hawks in their new restructured, revamped front office, leaving the New Orleans Pelicans. Bryson Graham has been the general manager the past year. He was replacing Trajan Langdon, who left to go take the top lead decision-making job over in Detroit. Look, Bryson Graham, there's no way to put this other than this is a loss for the team. Bryson Graham has been here since 2010. He has worked his way up from video intern. He started as a front office intern, then moved to player development director, moved to basketball operations associate, then video coordinator, then scouting coordinator, then director of scouting, then the assistant general manager, and then to being the actual general manager of the team, basically second in command to David Griffin. That's an incredible rise over a 15-year period, 14-year period, whatever you want to look at it with. You know, you don't make it that far and through multiple regimes, whether it's ownership or two front offices in Dell Demps and then David Griffin, unless you're good at what you do. Just as simple as that. You don't make it that far unless you're as good, or good at what you do, especially with bigger regime changes in there like this one, right? This is where, you have someone new come in. They want to usually kind of make some big changes, clean some house like we're seeing with Joe Dumars, and more on that here in a second. And by doing that, he survived the transition from Dell Demps to David Griffin. That says a lot about the work that he's doing for people to recognize that about him. And in general, he's been a big voice when it comes to drafting and scouting with all of that. And he was a driving force behind Trey Murphy, behind Herb Jones, Jose Alvarado, and some of the other picks on this team, Dyson Daniels, even though he's having success elsewhere. That's someone you want in the building, usually. And now he's going to be leaving. And we don't know exactly the exit here. Was this Joe Dumars pushing him out? Was this just a better opportunity for him? I'm not entirely sure, but it's probably a little column A, little bit of column B, or just maybe seeing the writing on the wall and looking for an opportunity elsewhere so that he could land on his feet. So that's what it is right now. A couple of things from this here. And one of this is, I don't want to say this means Joe Dumars is quite like consolidating power, right? Because he's in charge. He has all of the power in the first place. This is maybe more Joe Dumars remaking everything in his vision with the people that he wants doing those sorts of things. And Bryson Graham, maybe as good as he is, just isn't his guy, and he wants to bring in somebody else. And he's already brought in some of those people. Troy Weaver being added to senior vice president of basketball operations, right? And, from everything I had heard, he was basically second in command. So you, in a sense, in terms of the work, not in title, let's say, had a demotion for Bryson Graham. And Troy Weaver is a guy that's very involved in the scouting, very hands-on with all of that and the draft process. This could be good or bad. We got to give this regime, let's call it, this group, time to see and execute on their vision. We've kind of talked about, some of the process in getting these people here and some of the questions about that, but they're here. So we can just kind of look at it going forward, and I hope everybody succeeds. Troy Weaver, it could go either way, it feels like. When you look at the success of the Detroit Pistons this past year, he had his fingerprints over a lot of the team. Not entirely, right? It was Trajan Langdon who brought in not Joe Dumars. Trajan Langdon brought in Tobias Harris. They've added important veterans too under Trajan Langdon, Dennis Schroeder being one. I think Beasley was under. Was he under? Did Langdon add him? I can't remember. But a lot of the drafted guys were Troy Weaver. Now, had issues with the coach there, Monty Williams, and maybe that more had to do with ownership. So maybe Troy Weaver was handicapped a little bit, but I will say this about it. So you could give him the benefit of the doubt and be like, yeah, you know what? I think he's going to do good here. And I buy it. I've talked to a lot of people around and affiliated with Detroit and the Pistons, and they, let's put it mildly, are not Troy Weaver fans. But that, again, might just be more reacting to the actual record of the team, which, was not good during his tenure there at all, including a historic losing streak. Just not this past season, the season before, I guess, right now. So that's worth keeping in mind. So losing a guy in Bryson Graham who has shown success in terms of players and losing that voice, losing that mind isn't a great thing when you bring in someone like Weaver who has a lead decision maker, has a much more questionable track record. Now, Weaver has done a good job where he's been elsewhere. Before that with Oklahoma City and making some really great decisions there, really kind of impacting the Russell Westbrook decision to draft him. The past year Weaver spent with the Wizards, and before you go, you always want to hire people from the Pistons and Wizards. It's with the Wizards for 1 year. Them being bad had less to do with Weaver than other things having to do with that team and before him. So the Pelicans, in one sense, might just be fine. But this is Joe Dumars just, bringing in his people, the people he wants to work with, and putting the people he wants in the positions he wants them in to start to execute his vision. And I think that is worth keeping an open mind over. And let's see how it all plays out. Give them time, and we hope for success because, look, they're going to try and win. We'll have an early idea of whether, what they're doing here and whether it's working or not. But I want to get into this idea. While I do think losing Bryson Graham is a loss, it's not like you've lost everything that he contributed, and that's an important thing. So let's get into kind of some of the scouting stuff and what this means going forward. And also I'm going to ask you this question. Ponder it over the break here. Is continuity with this team actually an important thing? I'm not so sure. Let's talk about that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by DoorDash. NBA fans, you know what time it is? The NBA Finals. And that means big performances and even bigger rewards. So DoorDash is bringing the heat with a slam dunk deal for Dash Pass members during the 2025 NBA playoffs. It's called They Swoosh, You Score. Anytime a player drops 50 or more points in a playoff game, Dash Pass members score a free 3-piece crispy tender combo from Wingstop the very next day. So just place an order of $20 or more, use code Wingstop50 at checkout, and that combo is yours. Crispy, delicious, and totally free. Offer valid noon to midnight the day after the game. Terms apply. Look, it's always great to order in. You don't have to cook. And then all of a sudden you look at the bill and it's like, how is this so expensive? And it's all those fees. With Dash Pass, you get $0 delivery fees and exclusive perks like this one. So sign up for Dash Pass to unlock this and more exclusive deals all playoffs long. When any player scores 50 plus in a playoff game, Dash Pass members can grab a free 3-piece crispy tender combo from Wingstop the next day with a $20 or more order and code Wingstop50. That's Dash Pass, your door to more savings, more flavor, and more ways to win. Terms apply. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday. And make for your second listen here the Locked On NBA Big Board Show. NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the NBA draft. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we just reacted to Bryson Graham leaving. It's a loss. It's a loss. There's no getting around that. You just want smart people in the building. Simple as that. And Bryson Graham was definitely doing that. And it looked like he was going to be safe at one point. At the Joe Dumars introductory press conference, in what you would call like the green room, I guess, or something like that, where Dumars and his family was, you had the lead people with the Pelicans and organization in there. And then you also had Bryson Graham in that room. Willie Green wasn't even in there. He's kind of outside all of that. Bryson Graham was in there with Dumars and his family. That seemed to indicate in some capacity that he was maybe going to be safe, but maybe the, in a sense, demotion led him to seeking things elsewhere where you just want to feel valued. And that's an important thing all around. We'll actually get to that a little bit later in the show here. So this means the Pelicans this offseason have lost their three top decision makers in David Griffin, Bryson Graham, Swin Cash a year after losing their number 2 guy in Trajan Langdon too. Is that concerning that you've made those type of sweeping across the board changes? Right before the draft is 2 weeks away. Can you afford to lose someone like that 2 weeks before the draft? So let me put this, let's kind of look at what it means going forward, right? One thing that I think is important is while Bryson Graham is good, in my opinion, good at his job and someone you want to keep, a lot of the work that he's done is not just vanished. It's not gone, right? All the data is still here. Scouting reports, things and all that, still with the team, the files that they put together of all that stuff. All of that is still here, right? They fired most of the scouting staff earlier in, when Dumars came in. It's not like you lose all of the work. It's not like they're just storing the stuff in their mind, and when they're gone, you don't have access to it. They're filling out reports. They're doing things. It's probably getting put in some sort of CRM or something. I don't exactly know what it is, or binders and stuff like that. You still have all of that. Now, while the person who makes those decisions and write those reports is important to be able to talk about it and how they arrived at certain conclusions and things like that, a lot of the raw data and all of that is not gone. And that's, I think, an important thing to keep in mind here. If anything, you're kind of adding to some of this, right? Now you bring in Troy Weaver, who was not out of basketball and not doing things, working with the Wizards, right? Now, he might not have direct access to files, the materials, all that, but he knows the players he scouted and he brings that in. So now you're still combining that with what you have from Bryson Graham. New scouts will come in, will have been scouting, and they're going to bring in loads of information too. So in a way, maybe you're doubling up on it in some capacity, if that makes sense. So it's not like all the work is gone. A lot of that is still, all of that is still going to be here. You actually saw, I think it was the Knicks and Raptors get into a legal almost pillow fight over, people taking proprietary information in files. It's their scouting reports. Everyone kind of has this stuff, right? So you haven't just lost that. So the timing of this right before the draft and stuff doesn't particularly concern me. And I don't think that this is, where New Orleans is going to be, stuck and in a bad spot with the draft 2 weeks away. They've been finalizing their board with input from Bryson Graham and everybody, and you're going to be able to at least have all of that and still be able to rely on it. It hasn't vanished to thin air. I think another thing you could look at under Joe Dumars here is there is now maybe a lack of people with institutional knowledge of this franchise, and you don't have that anymore. Bryson Graham had been here for 15 years, about had as much institutional knowledge, especially in a front office capacity, as you could have. So you lose that. And is that a good or bad thing? On the surface, saying it like that doesn't sound good, right? But then you look at the team and the lack of success they've had and how they've been doing things, right? And is that something to worry about or not, right? Maybe you just need fresh changes. We've kind of all agreed, I think for the most part, that this franchise needed a breath of fresh air, whatever that kind of air was. And while you're getting it here, while Bryson Graham is good at his job. Let me be clear on that. Losing people that have been associated with this team where they've been losing. Now, it's not Bryson Graham's fault everyone got injured. So let's be clear. And that's same for David Griffin and others, right? But maybe you just need to completely clean house and do things in a different way than you were doing before. And I think that can be an important thing. We decry the lack of continuity, but also, do you want continuity from a 21-win season? Or do you want to do something differently, right? And I think that's also worth keeping in mind. So that's why when I see this move, and my initial reaction was like, oh, that's not good that he's leaving. You kind of go to like, okay, it's just kind of completing this process of this is going to be a different Pelicans organization. This is going to be a bit of a different era for this team, at least in terms of the front office, right? Because look, you still have Willie Green here. Ownership and the players are largely maybe going to be the same, at least when it comes to the players, ownership will be. So you have all of that still. So there is some continuity here, but if you weren't winning and you didn't like the moves that the Pelicans were making, even if a good person is leaving, well then maybe that's a good thing and exactly the type of approach Joe Dumars and this team needed to make. If he was brought in to really shake things up, well, he's really shaking things up, and you're probably pretty happy about that at this point in time. So that institutional knowledge of a team that has not been succeeding maybe is a good thing in a sense. That's not something that maybe I'm overly worried about this team losing when it comes to it, right? Like now there's, potentially a long-term impact on this, right? If Bryson Graham is as good as I'm saying and all of that, you have his stuff for this year, but you won't have it next year. You're going to miss a lot of that in the future. And that's important when it comes to it. Now, if this current regime succeeds, no one will particularly care. But if they don't, you could be looking at this as, a mistake by the team to let this sort of thing happen, because Bryson Graham is someone who is well respected all around the league and within the building too, has a lot of respect from basically everyone associated with the teams. So that institutional knowledge, maybe it's less important than just having good people in there. But I don't know if this team needs to keep and retain a lot of the institutional knowledge that they've had before, because what has that knowledge particularly gotten you? And maybe it means it's time for significantly bigger changes in the way they operate, in the way that they approach. And you don't want it to kind of be, well, this is how we've always done things. So that, in a sense, is why, in the open of the show, I was like, it's a big deal, but they're going to kind of be fine going forward too, because we don't want a repeat of what we've seen before. We want them to be better, and they have not been there. There's potential there, but this team hasn't been able to rise to that, reach their ceiling so far. And so if you want to do that, maybe you just simply need to do things differently than you were before. Look, there's no reason in bringing in Joe Dumars and doing exactly everything the same. You may as well have kept David Griffin and kept the same approach then, right? And at least you knew what you were getting with David Griffin. Here with Joe Dumars, we don't exactly know what we're getting just yet. We'll find out, I think, sooner than you might think, but it will take some time to evaluate it. And one thing that's going to be different is how people are being treated. It sounds like this is interesting here, and something that they really are focusing on. I'll explain what that is. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Monarch Money. You ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's very easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. So instead of juggling multiple apps, just use Monarch Money to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Are you saving for a house, saving for a car? Are you just trying to build some emergency funds for when things inevitably happen in real life? You're going to be able to do that with Monarch Money. They're going to help you achieve those goals that might have been out of reach before. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. Let me know what you think about Bryson. I don't want to call it Bryson Graham firing because it's not. He's leaving. About Bryson Graham leaving, and we don't have the specific details about it just yet. Let me know what you think about that in the comments down below. For your second listen, Saints maybe getting a new cornerback, new receiver, all of that being covered over at the Locked On Saints podcast with host Ross Jackson, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make Locked On Saints your second listen today. Ross and I are actually friends. He came over, along with Theo Mitchell, by the way, in-arena host of the Pelicans, to watch Game 2 of the NBA Finals, and my buddy Charles as well. That was a lot of fun. So we actually hang out. If you see us out, say hi. We're out pretty often right now. It's the summer. What else do you do in New Orleans? You stay inside because it's so hot outside. Okay, let's slightly switch gears, but it's kind of in the same vein of doing things differently. Joe Dumars, in an interview with NOLA.com, Times Picayune, and Rod Walker of The Advocate there, there's an interesting quote that I thought was interesting when it's about Joe Dumars and the approach he's taking to what he wants to do and how he wants this team to be. And he goes, quote, "Taking care of the players, taking care of their families, the way you do business, the way you travel, everything. People have to feel good about coming into the building," Dumars said. That's an interesting quote. Is that implying that people weren't happy, that the players weren't getting taken care of, the families weren't getting taken care of, all of those things? You know, under David Griffin, words family and all that were used a lot. And then Dumars comes in, and I'm taking this quote out of context too, so keep that in mind. You know, that I think is a little bit interesting to see. You know, when you look at what makes a team attractive to free agents, to players, to agents, right? It's how do you take care of their people? And there's a couple of teams around the league that are really known for like basically rolling out the red carpet. OKC is one of them, and that's why they're able to get guys like Isaiah Hartenstein, why players want to play for them in a small market because of those other things that have nothing to do but do impact on-court performance. You know, the Miami Heat are another team that's kind of known for that and taking care of families as well, along with the Golden State Warriors. There's a couple others too. You know, the Pelicans would be smart, particularly in small markets, to emulate that sort of thing. You know, when you look where you can get a competitive edge, do that. Look, you're not a big market team or, a team in general that has this insane track record of winning where players are just going to flock to you because, well, I can win a ring there or anything like that. And if that's the case, you need to find ways to make your team, your franchise, more attractive. Now, we went through the NFL survey that players did with the Saints, and I think there's some things that are applicable from that to the Pelicans here because, look, it's the same ownership group, and they share some, not share facilities, but they're kind of in the same general area when it comes to all of that. That stuff matters. And in general, the Saints graded out really well. The only thing that was like really negative was one, the head coach, and that's been changed. And the other was like the dining facility for him. And that just went through a complete renovation. So the Pelicans are going to be able to have access to all of that stuff as well. And for, Pelicans and things, it's on a much smaller scale, given it's an NBA team, not an NFL team. So the Pelicans could have some pretty good infrastructure for this sort of thing, but what can you do for the families? What can you do for the agents? Just taking care of people in a way that they haven't maybe been doing before. And I think that's something that this team really would be wise to invest in. And under Joe Dumars, he seems to be taking that approach. With Joe Dumars, one of the big things that I've been getting from him is that, he cares a lot more about the physical playing attributes about people. Basically, are you mentally tough? Are you a tough team in general? He very much cares about that. That has less to do with how high you jump, has less to do with how well you shoot or how many threes you take or your style of play or anything like that. He's focused on this idea of family, taking care of people. Right? Not how hard you practice, even though that's probably part of it, but doing all the things that you would just call like doing right by people and looking for those type of attributes. He's talked a lot about, I want to get to know the person, the as a whole and all of that. That's an important thing, I think, right? And if he's looking to understand that from players, shouldn't the players be looking to understand that from him? And one way that he can really show that is through these type of, let's call them ancillary things for lack of a better term. The way you travel. Let's make this comfortable for people. Let's make sure they're well taken care of. Are you handling arrangements and making things easy for family members who are coming to visit, or even for players to move down here? Is there like, I don't know if it's like a concierge service or what, but those are the type of things that I think can really try and help elevate a franchise, or at least make them more attractive. And in a small market where you're lacking some of those edges, those advantages, build that in. Build that in. I'm not saying it's going to make you land LeBron James in free agency or things like that, but is it going to hurt you? No, it requires ownership getting some more money and spending, but it seems like Joe Dumars, that's going to be the approach. And, when he was hired, they probably had talks about that sort of thing of you're going to need to spend. Gail Benson has been willing to spend when it seems like it's the right thing to do. And hopefully this is one of those times, because it does seem like this could really help the Pelicans. So I like this approach from Joe Dumars and the way that he's looking at things and trying to improve the things that he can improve pretty quickly. Other things are going to take time. This is something you could start putting in, day 1, day 2, the first month or so of his tenure here. Let me know what you think in the comments down below on YouTube. That's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. More on the draft tomorrow. I'm trying to line up a guest or two for later in the week as well. Got a whole lot to talk about. News basically feels like every day around this Pelicans team. So as always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'll be back with y'all tomorrow. So see y'all next time.